Hi, welcome back to the channel. This week it's the second part of the Studying a Track from Scratch series. Last week we did the kick, and this week we're on to the bass. So let's have a listen to what we created last week or last time. It's still sounding quite good, which is always reassuring after giving it a break for a bit. Let's now add another track. I'm just going to duplicate this one for two reasons. One, I keep the color scheme intact, and also I keep the routing in place into the kick and bass. So let's call this one bass, and then we can go ahead and delete all of this. Let's add, we're going to use operator for this one. So let's go to instruments, operator. Now let's enter some notes for the bass. We already have our kick notes in here, so they're already on F sharp. Let's just drag them across. We're going to need 3 of those because we have the kick, and then we have bass, bass, bass. What we're going to do now is just drag this across, so we're only playing 1/4. That just means any changes we make here, we don't need to be replicated 4 times. It can just be done on a single group here. Let's just solo this now. And as a default, just like last week, it's just a sine wave. Let's turn these other oscillators off, so we're only using the bottom one. Let's now change it from a sine to a saw, and then we have this. The first thing to do is to turn up the velocity here. So this is the amount at which it responds to the velocity input here. So if we play this back, and now we turn one of these down, you can hear the gallop. Let's put it back to 100 though. If we now click on the bottom right here, we can change the voices down to 1. You only ever want it to be mono, so let's just do that there, 1 voice. Also, just to check, the phase is set to retrig. Otherwise it's free running and you get a bit of a loose feeling bass by doing that. So keep retrig because you want the machine gun kind of feel. Let's turn resonance down, and then cutoff we can turn quite a bit down as well. Let's go down to, what do we get about? 92, sounds about right for now. We want 24 dB slope. There are other options here that introduce basically saturation, but we want to keep it clean for now. Now if we play this back, we can't really hear anything, and that's because we need to turn our envelope up. So let's turn envelope all the way up to 100. And now we get a bit of bass going. And now it's a case of changing the envelope slope to give it the character and drive that we want. We want to add the kick to that so we can hear it in context. Just make sure we turn the amp envelope down. You'll notice that when we play it back, if we think that it's too bright, we can then turn down the envelope here. So now that we know that, let's group this. And now let's assign, let's map that envelope to a macro. And let's call this one brightness. Obviously we don't want it to go into negative, so we can change that up here. Minimum, 0. Even that's a bit too much, so let's put it around, let's say 60. Even that's a bit extreme, but let's do 60. So by doing that, it gives us ample room to play around now. We can now shorten these notes a bit to give it a bit more punch. So that's sounding quite good, but one thing to note is that in the last video we made the kick peak at -10. The bass is currently peaking at -10.3. However, when we look at the bus, we can see that they're both combined peaking at -7. So what that means is we are losing 3 dB after the kick and the bass are merged or mixed together. So to check that, let's add a oscilloscope like we did last week from Bombshanker. This is a free oscilloscope. So that's our baseline that we've created. Let's now add the sidechain from the kick. And what do we see here? We see that the bass starts as expected on the second note, but then the kick is very much overlapping into that. So we have duplication here in this second note, or on the first bass note. We can see also that the tail of the bass is very abrupt, but we know that because we changed the MIDI note length and we also dialed back the decay. But we can increase this just a little bit if we like. Let's just add an EQ over here so we can track our frequencies. EQ 8. We always want oscilloscope to be at the end, so let's move EQ across. So what we need to do to fix this is we need to reduce this first bass note. And we can either do that by sidechaining or by using something like LFO tool. There are many ways to duck this first bass note. But ideally you want to keep it all at source. Just keeps it a lot cleaner, no artifacts. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a MIDI device called velocity. Let's drag that in just before operator. And now these parameters over to the right here, essentially they're the range. They constrain the range of velocities being output. So if we input 1, for example, and this is 1, it will output a 1. But if we input a 1 and then we set this to, let's say 50, the minimum value will be 50. So what we can do then, if we know that, we can grab just the first note. Let's turn that all the way down to 1. Let's just check these are still on 100. They're not. Let's turn them back up to 100. Okay, so now let's turn this MIDI device off, the velocity, and play it back. We'll get quite a pronounced gallop. And you can see that the first bass note has now been removed from that. But now if we turn velocity on and then dial up this amount, this gallop will gradually come back to be the machine gun-like bass that we had earlier. You can see also when we play it back, we can go above 100, which means that the gallop has gone the other way. The second note is more pronounced than the remaining 2. See, which is also what we don't want. So what we want, let's turn this down, and then we're going to add a macro. Let's assign that to the low. Let's assign it to this one. And then we want the high value to be maximum 100. So then you can see we go from nothing in there all the way up to 100, so it's exactly in line with the previous 2. Let's call this one bounce, or yeah, let's call it bounce. And now if we look at our peak output, we can see that we are much closer to the 10, so we're not losing much at all anymore. If we turn this down, we're back to 10 because this is previously the peak value of 10. We have no bass note here, we're not losing anything at all. If we turn this all the way up, we're back to losing 3. But let's now just play with this bounce until we get the drive that we like. That sounds quite good. I'm happy with it there. At this stage, we also need to check that the third bass note is not then running over into the kick drum. So if we demonstrate that, if we look at the release, it's currently 31.1, but if we extend that, you can see that this is extending now into the kick, and that's further changing the impact of that kick. If we turn it down, you can see that that completely disappears again. So let's put it back to what it was, 31.1. Just to make doubly sure though, we're going to take a shaper like this. Let's take this whole device. Let's put it over here. Let's put it before EQ8. We can even embed it into there. There we go. Let's also bring the EQ back in, embed it inside this instrument. Now, because we took it from the kick, we have this pattern setup, which we don't want. We want to make it not like that. We essentially want to ensure that the last bass note cuts off definitely before the kick. Something like this. Just to make sure it's on 1/4. Let's play this back. And then we can test it. Let's turn this down like this. And you can see that the last three are fading out. So let's put it back to what it was, just a bit before the end. So we're definitely cutting off before that, the first kick there. Let's take a bit of bass out of that. Let's go to the steep cut. And then cut it just below the fundamental, so about here. So now that we've done that, let's look at the interaction between the kick and the bass waveforms, and you can see that they're very much out of phase with each other. So what that means is that this bass, this cycle, is offsetting this cycle from the kick. So they essentially offset into each other and negate. The same here. And this is because they're both playing the same pitch at this time in the note. So to fix that, we need to add a bit of dispersion, or essentially a way to move or to phase align the bass so that they're perfectly in line with each other. So to do that, using only native Ableton tools, let's go to Audio Effects. We're going to grab a Dynamics. We're going to grab a multiband. Let's drag that into the rack. Also, let's turn off the high, the mid, and the low here. So there's no compression going on whatsoever. And then we're going to change the phase alignment by adjusting the frequency here. So that's sounding quite good. You can see that they're perfectly in phase now, just with a tiny bit of phase alignment. So that seems to be working okay with just one, but let's just duplicate it anyway so we are future-proofed. So now that we have the multiband duplicated, we're going to map. Let's go map again. Map the frequency to macro. And let's do it again for the second one. Map and map. So now we have this dial. Let's call this one, we're going to rename dispersion. And now this knob controls the frequency. However, you can see the range is way too much, so let's change it. We only want it to be something around 300. So let's leave it around there. So we're getting there. If we look at the bass, we really want that to peak around -12. So currently it's -10.4. Let's add a utility at the end of this. And it was 10.4, so that means -1.6. We need to turn that down by. See, looking at the scope again, now that we've added this dispersion, you can see that the bass is now trickling over into the kick, which we didn't want before. And the reason for that is because we put those after the shaper here, which was a bit silly. So let's grab those, or let's move the shaper now right to the very end of the chain. One thing I didn't notice earlier is where the phase was still set to 4.72, which we had for the kick. We need to turn that down to 0. And then we can also add a point at the start just to make sure that we're not interfering with the kick and bass. So let's put them here. Let's do a ramp up to the second one. And now that we've done that, we have kick and bass perfection. We have -10, -12, and -10. So nothing is overlapping. We're getting the maximum amplitude that we possibly can out of this. And it's exactly as we want. So now that we have the basics now we can go and duplicate this. Let's do this 2 bars. Now that we have 2 bars, we can get funky with some grooves. Then once you've added a few more notes, you might actually notice that the peak level is changing a bit now. And that's because the higher notes peak a little bit higher than the lower notes. So there's a couple ways to fix that, but what I like to do is just go back to our utility here. Let's turn this down. Let's go try there, 3.5. And now let's add a limiter. Let's put it before the utility here. And we're going to turn the ceiling down to just before, so it barely catches the peaks. So there. It's only touching the peaks of the higher notes. So we have 11.9, we can adjust this now to 3.4, I think it must be. No, 3.6, the other way. So there we are, part 2 of the Track from Scratch project. We now have our bass. So next time will be the percussion. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, bye.